How's everybody doing? Okay, let's get started here. I'm going to blow the screen up so you can see. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what you're going to be witnessing here is a big money pattern. What is a big money pattern? It is any combination that has the same sum, that has the same pairs, that continuously and consistently repeats itself by showing up and showing out. So again, this is quantum numerology, where you'll see me showing you exactly what to do. So pay close attention because this is the prerequisite to join my group. So you see here, 279, ladies and gentlemen, the only number on fire. I told my VIP, if you want to win, look, the fire, I promise, will manifest between the dates 1/7 and 1/15. Ladies and gentlemen, I met my deadline date, and that dropped on the 14th. Only combination on fire. Ladies and gentlemen, you got 9745. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP. Look, I'm going to put one number on fire. A 5-year-old can pick out fire. You see it, 9745. Straight! I told them they would see this between the dates, January 9th and January 17th. This number dropped on January 14th. Ladies and gentlemen, 139. Ladies and gentlemen, pay close attention. To win, focus on my top 5 3 digits. You see that, right? I tell you, they will manifest from 19 to 117. I also guarantee, look at this, 1, 2, 3, the number 3 big money pattern in your state first, then in these 7 catalyst states. Straight. Ladies and gentlemen, 549. This was, let's see here, Georgia. As you can see, I guarantee my VIP to win, focus on my top 5 3 digits. They will manifest 114 to 121. Ladies and gentlemen, this was guaranteed to happen in 1 hour. Ladies and gentlemen, 2137. Ladies and gentlemen, you see it for yourself. I promised my VIP the number 1 big money pattern would manifest between the dates 1/7 and 1/15. It dropped on 1/14. Ladies and gentlemen, 6222. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP the only big money pattern on fire would manifest between the dates 1/11 and 1/19. Ladies and gentlemen, you got 063. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP that I would manifest the top two by the deadline date in Michigan. It dropped on 1/14. 1/14 was my deadline date. Ladies and gentlemen, 612, ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP that the triple dollar sign big money pattern top 5 is what you need to focus on. I promise the triple dollar signs. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the first triple dollar sign on the first best alternate. 111 to 119, I told him in Ohio. Ladies and gentlemen, you got 916. Ladies and gentlemen, you see 916. Ladies and gentlemen, I told my VIP to win on 112. Focus on my top 5 3 digits, which I promise the first 2 big money patterns will manifest from 112 to 120. In most cases, I can make this happen in 24 to 48 hours. That was 48 hours. Straight. Ladies and gentlemen, 906 in North Carolina. Ladies and gentlemen, on January 9th, I told my VIP, look, the number 1 big money pattern will manifest straight in North Carolina between the dates January 10th and January 18th. Ladies and gentlemen, 1109, ladies and gentlemen, I guaranteed my VIP 1109 would manifest between the dates 19 and 117 in Tennessee. Ladies and gentlemen, 897, ladies and gentlemen, Black Sheep on time to manifest straight, 897. 16 to 114, that is the deadline date. Here I go showing off a little bit. Promised my number 1 big money pattern would manifest 111 to 119. Ladies and gentlemen, 5694. Ladies and gentlemen, 5694. Only motherfucking big money pattern on fire. Deadline date. Again, this is for investment purposes only. You see it for yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, 687. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP. Look, the top 2 will do. To win, focus on the top 5 3 digits. I promise the first 2 big money patterns will manifest 110 to 119. Here I go showing off. Black sheep will manifest straight. Why? Because nobody's going to be paying attention. Nobody's going to be investing in it. But my group will. 19 to 118. I told you, nobody is going to be wagering on that pattern. Ladies and gentlemen, 483. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP. The top 2 will do. I told them to win. Focus on the top 5 3 digits. I promise the top 2 will manifest 111 to 119. I also guaranteed you would see it in Michigan. Here I go showing off again. black sheep, on time, straight. I told you, nobody would be paying attention. But the lottery commission they know to draw the numbers that will pay out the least amount of money. I have the ability to give you that edge right there. Ladies and gentlemen, 7, 4, 8, 9. Ladies and gentlemen, my only motherfucking big money pattern on fire. I promised it would just come and do it in Ohio between the dates 112 and 119. So that one there, in most cases, I made it happen in 24 to 48 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 881. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP that I could make manifest the very last number you see. It is a strategic formula that I developed, and it works. You see it for yourself right there, 881. Straight. Ladies and gentlemen, you got the 449. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP, I said, hey, look, those triple dollar signs, they mean something. They mean I promise this will manifest straight between the dates. Look, on the date 114, I told them, I promise I can make that happen. I made it happen. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 0, 3, 4, 3. Ladies and gentlemen, you see it for yourself. I guaranteed my VIP. Look, if you want to even come close to winning, focus on my top 5 4 digits. They will manifest January 8th to January 17th. I also guarantee specifically the number 4 big money pattern in Florida. I made it happen on January 14th. Ladies and gentlemen, 516. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP that I could make manifest 516 by the deadline date. Straight. You see it for yourself. I put all of my predictions in writing. Ladies and gentlemen, 978. Ladies and gentlemen, number 1 motherfucking big money pattern. You see it for yourself between the dates 111 and 119. Ladies and gentlemen, is that 094? Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP, look, if you go back to the deadline date, this is what will happen. You will be manifesting these numbers for yourself just on the belief system. I put it in writing on 1/5 that I was going to make this happen between the dates 1/6 and 1/14. It happened straight on 1/14. Ladies and gentlemen, 19, is that 57? Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP, I told them, hey, look, that very last number you see, I will and can make that manifest first And guess what? I don't practice this, but you know what? I can make this happen in most cases in 24 to 48 hours. You see it for yourself. On 112, I told them this is when you should invest in it. Ladies and gentlemen, 8837. Ladies and gentlemen, I guaranteed my VIP. Look, if you want to win, focus on my top 4 digits. They will manifest on 114 in Texas. Boom, boom, boom. Ladies and gentlemen, 398. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP that I could make 398 manifest straight. And I told them, look, I don't practice this, but in most cases, I can make it happen in 24 to 48 hours. You see it for yourself right there. Ladies and gentlemen, 214, ladies and gentlemen, I promise to make this happen straight in 23 hours. Boom, boom, boom. You see it for yourself right there in writing. Ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at 115, 2120. You see it for yourself, 18 hours. My black sheep told us, look, nobody's going to be investing or playing or wagering on this number. You can do well. Ladies and gentlemen, look, 115. Ladies and gentlemen, the black sheep told us, look, nobody's going to be investing or looking for that one to drop that way. So 115 is going to do the trick. 115 did it on time, straight. Ladies and gentlemen, 874. Ladies and gentlemen, I guaranteed my VIP that I could make 874 manifest straight between the dates 17 and 115. Ladies and gentlemen, that was on the deadline date 115. You see it for yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, promised the triple dollar sign big money pattern would manifest 111 to 119. You see it right there. Ladies and gentlemen, 5928. Ladies and gentlemen, the only motherfucking big money pattern on fire. By the deadline date, you see it for yourself right here. Ladies and gentlemen, 1641. Ladies and gentlemen, my number one motherfucking big money pattern. I told my VIP, look, you will see this happen between the dates 110 and 118. Ladies and gentlemen, 386. Ladies and gentlemen, I triple dollar signed that big money pattern, told my VIP, you're going to see it between the dates 111 and 120. Ladies and gentlemen, 523. Ladies and gentlemen, you see 523 straight, promised, triple dollar sign, 113 to 121 in Ohio. Ladies and gentlemen, 404. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise to manifest the very last motherfucking number you see straight. Triple dollar signed it as proof that it would happen. Ladies and gentlemen, 045. Ladies and gentlemen, black sheeps don't lie. To manifest on time, 114 to 121. You see it, 045 straight. Here we go, showing off. Triple dollar sign 405 to manifest 114 to 121. Ladies and gentlemen, 0783. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP, look, to win, focus on the top 4 digits. I promise the first 2 big money patterns have the highest probability of winning. They will manifest from 114 to 122 in North Carolina. I don't practice this, but in most cases, I can make it happen in 24 to 48 hours. Here I go showing off again and again and again and again. I told my VIP those triple dollar signs mean something. I told them, when I darken in the stars, you can bet heavy, invest heavy, wager heavy. That's what those darkened stars mean. Ladies and gentlemen, 0617. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP, look, you can see it for yourself. The top 2 big money patterns is promised to manifest in your state. Ladies and gentlemen, 901 for New York. You see it for yourself. Number 1 big money pattern. 9253, ladies and gentlemen, I triple dollar signed it as proof that they would see it between the dates 113 and 120 in New York. Ladies and gentlemen, 312, that 312, you see it for yourself. Number 1 big money pattern between the dates 111 and 119. Ladies and gentlemen, 9537. Ladies and gentlemen, I triple dollar signed that big money pattern to manifest first in Tennessee between the dates 1/8 and 1/16. Ladies and gentlemen, 5038. Ladies and gentlemen, you see it right there. I'm super consistent. I promised the only big money pattern on fire to manifest between the dates 113 and 121. A 5-year-old can pick out fire. A 5-year-old can pick the number 1 big money pattern. A 5-year-old can pick out triple dollar signs. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, I promise the only big money pattern on fire would manifest over and over and over again. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 853. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP the number 1 motherfucking big money pattern would manifest straight between the dates 110 and 118. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 664. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised 664. The very last number you see manifesting first, 113 to 120 in Michigan. Ladies and gentlemen, 8092. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP, look, the first 2 will do. To win, focus on the top 5. I promise the first 2 will manifest 112 to 119. Ladies and gentlemen, when you see me circle a state like that, that means that the number came from that state. You see it for yourself. 8920. Ladies and gentlemen, 4252. Ladies and gentlemen, 2245. Told my VIP, look, these are numbers that nobody will be investing in between the dates 112, and 119. Ladies and gentlemen, 531. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, I guaranteed 7 hours before it debuted. Ladies and gentlemen, 2779. Ladies and gentlemen, number one motherfucking big money pattern in South Carolina. Said you would see it between the dates 113 and 120. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 118. Ladies and gentlemen, only motherfucking big money pattern on fire designed to work in your state. Ladies and gentlemen, 647. Ladies and gentlemen, the black sheep don't lie. They said it was going to manifest 113 to 120. No one was going to be paying attention. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my only big money pattern on fire would manifest between the dates, on the date of 115 as proof. Ladies and gentlemen, 4806. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my only big money pattern on fire would manifest. You see it for yourself in Florida, 110 to 118. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 3, 2, 6, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise 3, 2, 6, 1. I told my VIP, look, I'm darkening in these stars. You can bet as much as you want. I am more than certain that this is going to happen. But y'all don't hear me though. Straight. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 912. Ladies and gentlemen, 912, black sheep, one time to manifest on 115. I told everybody that most people won't be investing in that combination. Therefore, the lottery commissions will have a very high probability of drawing that number. Why? It saves them so much money. Y'all gotta believe me when I tell you this. Look at this. I promised you. Look. The top two will do. Focusing on my top 5, you have to realize I promise the first 2 will manifest 114 or 121 in your state first, and then North Carolina. Ladies and gentlemen, 801. Ladies and gentlemen, you see it for yourself, $$, the big money pattern to show up and show out on 115. Ladies and gentlemen, look at this, 709. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my top 2 big money patterns would manifest between the dates 18 and 117. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 2472. Ladies and gentlemen, black sheeps don't lie. Told us, look, on 115, nobody is going to be investing in that combination. Why don't you box it? Guess what? Ladies and gentlemen, 7172. I want to go back here real quick. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Here we go, 7172. Ladies and gentlemen, number one motherfucking big money pattern. I promise you will do well with that number one prediction. I work extremely hard to make sure that I'm putting these numbers in the right position. Ladies and gentlemen, 7471, again and again, the number one motherfucking big money pattern between the dates 113 and 120. I told you I could do this. Ladies and gentlemen, 4876. Ladies and gentlemen, again and again and again, the number one motherfucking big money pattern. Woo! Y'all see it for yourself. Look at me go. Ladies and gentlemen, right there. Promise to manifest 115 between the dates 110 and 118 in Texas. Over and over and over again, I'm providing the right numbers. 943, ladies and gentlemen, wait a minute. 943, this is on 115. 943 to manifest straight. You see it for yourself. Number one motherfucking big money pattern. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your, what is that? 073. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise the triple dollar signs would manifest 112 to 119. Ladies and gentlemen, 943. Ladies and gentlemen, 943. You see it for yourself right there from 114 to 121. Ladies and gentlemen, 684. Ladies and gentlemen, promise the triple dollar sign is a big money pattern. It will manifest in New York. Ladies and gentlemen, 3889. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise the number one motherfucking big money pattern will work in your state. This dropped in New York. Ladies and gentlemen, 943 over and over and over again. I'm telling you the truth, but y'all not listening. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised 943 would manifest straight. Ladies and gentlemen, you see the 5, 1, 2, 3. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised the top 2. You see it for yourself. Focus on the top 5. I promise the top 2. Between the dates 116. Oh, would you look at that? 116, the motherfucking day of. Y'all can't beat this. Y'all can't do this. I'm telling you the truth. You got 841. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised 841 would manifest today straight in a matter of hours. Ladies and gentlemen, 207. Ladies and gentlemen, you see the 207. I guaranteed my black sheep wouldn't lie to you. I told you no one would be thinking about 207 straight today. Ladies and gentlemen, I went a step further though. I told my VIP, hey, look, I promise you that they will drop that combination today, 114 to 121 in Georgia. They did it. Ladies and gentlemen, you see it for yourself. 2946. Ladies and gentlemen, that was in Michigan 23 motherfucking hours ago. I told you, I don't practice this shit, but I can make it happen. You see it for yourself. Look at that. I made this happen for Michigan. That's what all those rings around Michigan means, that I got it from Michigan. Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, here I go showing off. I guaranteed you would see it. I guaranteed and promised you would see it. Y'all not listening though. Look at this. 946 in Michigan, 946. I guaranteed my number 4 big money pattern would manifest from 115 to 122 straight. Ladies and gentlemen, 585. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised the only motherfucking big money pattern on fire would manifest 112 to 119 straight. Ladies and gentlemen, get to 0311. Look at this. This was for Ohio. 16 hours ago, my black sheep said, you know what? Ain't nobody gonna be doing it. Ain't nobody gonna be doing it. Why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? Ladies and gentlemen, you got that, what is that, 6825? Ladies and gentlemen, I told you, my only motherfucking big money pattern on fire will make it by the deadline date. That's how great my forecasts are. You see it for yourself. I told my VIP, you'll do great to invest in it 1/8 to 1/16. Ladies and gentlemen, 273. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP, look, the number one motherfucking big money pattern, I can make that number manifest straight between the dates 1/9 and 1/18. I did that shit today. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 5, 3, 9. Ladies and gentlemen, 11 motherfucking hours ago, I put it in writing. I told my VIP, hey, look, I'm going to make this shit happen straight in New York. Watch me do it. I did it. You see it for yourself. I said from 1/16. Somebody tell me what today is. Woo! Look at this. Ladies and gentlemen, 8350. Boom, boom, boom. Only motherfucking big money pattern on fire. You don't see your state because you're under a spell. I told you, this shit is very, very well. You see it working every single day. I told you, look, the fire will manifest, I promise, between the dates 112 and 119. Has anybody been taking a record of how many numbers on fire I predicted would manifest? How many of those numbers in the number one, the number two position that I promised would manifest? How many of those numbers with triple dollar signs that I promised would manifest? How many numbers in the number 3 and 4 position, big money patterns, guaranteed to manifest by the provided dates? Ladies and gentlemen, North Carolina 169. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, 169, my number one motherfucking big money pattern. I told you, look, this is what's going to happen no matter fucking what. But y'all don't hear me though. Ladies and gentlemen, you got the 8192. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my number one motherfucking big money pattern. You see it for yourself, 19 to 117. I told you I can make it happen, and I did. Here I go showing off. Told you, look, I will put triple dollar signs promising they will manifest. 19 to 117. That's a lot of work right there, ladies and gentlemen. That's a lot of work right there. I'm telling you the truth. So I'm telling you, look, I'm the type of person that I'm not going to gamble. I am not. But what I will do is I am going to invest in the best. I am the best. You should know that. If you've been sitting here watching me illustrate, demonstrate the supernatural power of what I am forecasting, I show you the date that I saw it. I show you the dates that you will see it. I tell you verbally and put it in writing to invest between those dates. Focus on the top 5. I promise the top 2 triple dollar signs and fire will manifest. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if I don't provide this information, shame on me. But if you're not listening, shame on you. Because look, I'm not guessing or stressing about what the number's going to be. I already fucking know. I'm trying to let you know. I'm not hoping, I'm not praying on what the number's gonna be. I already know. I'm trying to provide you with the number one highest probability. I'm trying to provide you with the only numbers on fire that have the highest probability. So again, so this is what I'm doing. I don't know what y'all doing. I am not doing rundowns. I am not doing flips and mirrors. This is what I am doing right there. So again, I'm not saying that these numbers might come. I'm not saying that they may come. I'm not even saying that I think they will come. I promise, I'm guaranteeing that my shit will work. Number one, fire, triple dollar signs. Don't get it twisted, ladies and gentlemen. I make it look easy, but it's very difficult to remain this accurate every day. So I'm going to see everybody at the winner's table no matter what. I'm a little burnt out. You see the accuracy of my work. If you're interested in joining a winning team, by all means, if you know my prerequisite, I told you over and over what you need to do, told you what to focus on, told you what I promise will happen, told you by the dates. So again, don't ask me if I do Louisiana, California, Nebraska, Connecticut. If you don't see your state, something's wrong with you, not me. So don't think that I'm rude. I don't have time for the fuckery. I don't. And you're fucking with me when you ask me, do I do your state? You hurt my feelings when you ask me, do I do your state? It makes me want to block you because I know I'm going to have issues with you when you ask me, do I do your state? I'm serious. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just telling you. You got to vibrate so high that you can't deny that what you're doing is always going to be right. That's what I do. That's how I think. You got to remember, you are what you think all day long. So, whatever you say you thinking, that's what you are. And I told you yesterday, you're a star. And I know that there's a very high probability that you're a high ranking star if you've been sitting here listening to me. Again, energy, frequency, and vibration is real. I will see everybody at the winner's table no matter what. I'm going to leave you with a few strong ones. This will be for all states. Okay. 3, 7, 2, 8, 1, 1, 5, 4, 3, 6, 2, 8, 3, 4, 0, 8, 4, 7, 9, 3, and 6, 6, 6, 2, and 4791. Oh, also 1001. Okay. Also 4791. Moving forward. Huh. Let's see. Oh yeah, let's see here. Yeah. And okay, let's see. All right. This one here. Okay. Wow, 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 wow. Okay, I'm going to show you guys something and then I'm going to log off. I want you to pay very close attention to these combinations. I'm going to take you back a year ago. A year ago. Now, pay close attention to the dates. Watch this. Snapshot that. Take a snapshot of that. Okay. All right. I don't know if you can see. How many people can see 0829. Right there, right? The 0287 right there, right? 3510 right there, right? Watch this. 1856 right here. 5290 4189. Look at this, ladies and gentlemen. 0745. You see that, right? 0745. Now watch this. That's a big money pattern. Well, there's your 4161 right here, right? There's your 1845 right here, right? Going backwards, 7054 2509 1498. There's your 4161. Again, 0745 5723, which is also 5123. So watch out for it. Okay, again, ladies and gentlemen, if you understand, overstand the prerequisite to join my VIP group, then by all means, email me at dynamicallydriven@gmail. Give me that prerequisite. Once I have made contact with you, then I know that you're serious. I'm going to answer you, and I'm going to tell you that you can go ahead and go to dynamicpredictions.onrender.com, where when you purchase a package, I don't care what package you pick, I'm going to gift you 7 free days. And that's a value of $100 or more. Also, for the VIP, I need you to concentrate on the number one, at least in your state and the states that you want to win in. And also, don't forget, when you can, add the fire. I can't tell you how important it is to add the fire, because when they don't pull the number one, they're going to pull the fire. When they don't pull the fire, they're going to the $sign. If they don't do the $sign, it will most likely be a guaranteed number 3 or number 4, or it's going to be a black sheep number that nobody's interested in winning with. So I'm going to see everybody at the winner's table, no matter what. Abundant prosperity in health and in wealth to all who follow me and believe in the hard work that you see me accomplishing every single day. I'm not going to fail at this, ladies and gentlemen. I am not. As you can see, I've been doing this for 8 years, and each year, each day, I get stronger and stronger with my forecast.